Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today we welcome award-winning financial journalist Chris Taylor. Mr. Taylor is a senior correspondent for Reuters, contributor to the Wall Street Journal Buy Side Fortune, with published articles in the Financial Times, CNBC, Money Magazine, and many more. In this episode, we discuss various topics including personal finance journalism, tipping culture, impulse buying on social media, the relationship between money and happiness, and the importance of time in personal finance. Enjoy the show. Chris, we are thrilled that you are able to join us today. Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here. I've followed you on Twitter for a very long time. I think we might have joined at the same time, maybe 15 years ago. So I'm very familiar with your stuff.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah. And likewise, I love following your stuff. And I think you're right. It was back in the early days when I think it's called X now. I'm not going to do that. It's still a bird to me.
But you were FinEd Chat, right? That was your handle?
FinEd Chat's my personal Twitter account. Yeah. Back in my teaching days when I taught personal finance, I would just, share nothing. I would just share everything that had to do with the personal finance space. I think that's probably where we connected. Yeah. Now, you're Canadian, and so I feel compelled to ask like two questions that probably every American asks you. First of all, why are Canadians so nice?
So you're assuming that all Canadians are nice. I'm not sure about the premise of that question. I hate to burst your bubble, but not every Canadian is nice. There are plenty of jerks up there, just as there are down here. But on average, yeah, you're probably right. We are nicer than your average American. And why that is? Yeah. Why that is, I think we tend to be pretty conflict averse.
Okay.
And we don't like to talk about stuff. We tend to bottle it up and hide it. Americans are much more forthright and tell you what they think. And Canadians are a little more passive aggressive in that respect. I think that goes all the way back to the revolution. We never broke up with the British. We're still part of the British Commonwealth, unfortunately.
Oh, how does that work?
The head of state is still officially the king, which is crazy to me. I think that should have been rectified a long time ago. I think you guys had it right. You broke up with them back in the day, and now you're doing your own thing. We're still under the British.
And it wasn't hard. They wore their red coats in the woods.
Yeah, they've got their own issues.
They do. Do you have a French-speaking part of Canada just to try to needle at them a little bit?
Quebec, you mean? Yeah, I went to college in Quebec. So I was there for 5 years, and I speak it myself.
Wow. Okay. My son is fluent in French. Perhaps you guys can have a conversation where I know nothing of what you have to say.
Okay. Yes.
So the second question every American asks is, do you like your health care?
Do I like the Canadian healthcare system?
Yes.
So I've been down in the States a long time, almost 25 years.
Okay.
So I can't say that I have any recent familiarity with the Canadian system. I was there as a kid, and philosophically, I think most Canadians like the idea that healthcare is available to everyone for free. But practically, that runs into problems like long wait times, like underfunded systems. So Canadians definitely have their own healthcare problems. It's just different problems than Americans do.
Yeah, it's an impossible thing to be able to provide with perfection. There's no way to do it.
Yeah. But I would hope that universal healthcare would survive, but the fact that you have to wait a long time for these procedures is not great. So a lot of Canadians, in fact, come to the States to get stuff done. So I
Okay.
think no one has figured this out. It's expensive and tricky, and I wish we had all the answers.
I'm with you. Well, if you're listening, don't worry. We're not going to belabor the pitfalls of healthcare, but we are going to talk about Chris's personal finance journalism and some of his favorite stories. And I want to begin with understanding what it was that drove you into personal finance journalism.
From my perspective, it was kind of accidental. I graduated from journalism school up in Ottawa at Carleton University. And my first job out of college was at a business publication, which is called Business in Vancouver, and then which is my hometown. From there, I went to a magazine called BC Business, and from there, I was hired by a magazine in New York, which was called Smart Money, which you might remember. It
Yeah.
was the Wall Street Journal's magazine.
Yep.
And they brought me down to the States, got me a green card, and all of a sudden I was in the thick of the media world. So I didn't have an economics degree, a finance degree. I had a journalism degree and just became familiar with the subject matter over time. So I was with Smart Money 5 years and have been freelance for the next 20. So it's something that developed over time. And, in this field, you got to be an expert in a new subject of personal finance every single day. So they just throw you in the deep end.
Yeah. And it's always changing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like one day you're writing about taxes. The next day you're writing about college savings. The next day about retirement. And you got to be an expert in every one of those things. It's very intellectually stimulating.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And the big news today is that the Case-Shiller Index found that home prices are starting to slow. They're not. They did year over year. They did not rise as much this year. So I'm sure once we get done, you'll be busy figuring out what the Fed's going to do about that, how that's going to impact the economy, blah blah blah.
Right. Well, it's got to slow down at some point, right? It can't keep skyrocketing forever
No,
because nobody can afford a house.
no,
That's not
that's right.
sustainable.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Now, you're a father of two. What are your favorite money lessons for your kids?
I find that kids these days are surrounded by a lot of junky information.
Mm,
They're on
yeah,
TikTok and stuff like that, and that's where they're getting their ideas.
yeah,
So, unfortunately, that means that they think about stuff like NFTs and meme coins and sports betting and all this stuff that aren't really drivers of long-term wealth. So I find that I have to be the guy who brings them down to earth and instructs them about how to actually build long-term wealth, which is the stock market, which is saving portions of their paycheck and seeing that grow over time rather than the get rich quick mentality that I think they all have. There was a survey recently that asked kids what they want to invest in, and that was their answer, like NFTs and meme coins. And I was like, oh my God, do they really think that? Is that what they think is going to build wealth for them? So unfortunately, we have to correct that and
hmm
kind of bring them down to earth and tell them the basics of personal finance, because I don't think they're getting that on TikTok.
yeah. And as you brought up gambling, it occurs to me that because of the laws that allow for gambling across the country being passed, that now we see advertisements for it everywhere. And it just dawned on me, wow, if you're a child and you're kind of exposed to this for the last 5 years of your life, that's like for many of the children, that's most of the life that they can kind of recall, at least where they're like doing things like that, where they can actually have fantasy football teams or whatever. So that it's interesting you bring that up, that we have to make sure our kids are aware that, NFTs are, I don't know, you don't want to tell a kid, hey, they're just stupid, but you want to be able to show them the math behind it, or that gambling is entertainment and it should be just a small fraction of what you spend. It's It's not an
Right.
investment strategy.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, the NFL drives me crazy because, on the one hand, with their players, they say, oh, gambling is a terrible thing. You should never do it. And then, every single ad on their broadcast is for gambling. So is
yeah.
it good or is it not? It's very inconsistent. And like you said, kids are absorbing this stuff. They absorb everything around them. So basically, I just tell my kid, gambling is for suckers. Just keep that in
Mm,
mind.
mm,
I don't
yeah.
know if he's gotten that message yet, but that's what I try to tell him.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what what personal finance stories that you write generally get the most attention, and why?
I think a lot of personal finance journalism is pretty repetitive and explanatory stuff, like what is a Roth IRA? What do you need to know this tax season? That kind of stuff. But I think what really hits a chord with people is when you get into the emotional aspects of money. Um, you know, uh, like for instance, I'm doing a piece on tipping right now,
Oh, okay.
which hasn't come out yet. And that's an example of something where people feel very emotionally about it. Like they
Yeah.
feel overwhelmed. They feel like everyone in the world is asking them for a tip, and the companies are trying to get them to do what they should be doing for their own employees. So
Yep.
when you get a subject like that that really hits them where they live, I think that is what makes things go viral. I understand, this straightforward explanatory stuff, there's a role for that. But when you get into the emotions of money, because there are a lot of emotions around money, I think that is what really gets people's attention and makes things go viral.
So, not to reveal too much of what you're going to release, but do you think that the tipping culture is at a tipping point? Not to throw out a dad joke, but do you think that we're at the point where like people are like, look, no more, and we're going to see kind of a change from that?
Yes, because there was a new survey that's out, which is what I'm writing about. And it showed that actually in the last few years, every year, the percentage of people who always tip in any number of categories is going down.
Hmm.
And not just one year, it's going down and down and down. So, what is that telling us? It's telling us that people are fed up, that
Yeah.
they don't have money to be tipping 20, 25, 30% on every transaction, that they're being asked to do it in situations that make no sense, like automatic kiosks where there's no person involved. You know,
Yeah.
it's it's out of control. People don't have extra money to be doing this, and that's what they're telling people by their tipping behavior. So yeah, I think we've reached peak tipping, and it's coming back down to earth.
My wife and I were talking about where to go to dinner a couple of nights ago, and we love kava. And first thing my wife said was, well, at least I don't have to tip because they don't ask for a tip there. And that was like the top of her mind, is that kind of that guilt, like you're really competing between guilt and anger. Like when you're going to Chipotle or whatever, and like they just spin the thing around, they don't do anything, and there's a tip. And do you just tip because you feel bad because they're probably underpaid, and then you're a little angry about it, or um, do you not tip and then you feel guilty?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's guilt, there's shame, there's the fact that a person is staring you in the face, waiting for a tip. There's a lot of emotional currents in this transaction, and people don't know what to do because it's kind of a new world with all these tip screens where things are preloaded, and you don't really have a choice to not tip.
Yeah.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
That's right. Yeah. Now, obviously most of us are on social media, right? And, kind of speaking of just another place where the financial world is changing. 20 years ago, tip culture wasn't nearly what it is today. Well, social media didn't really exist, certainly not to the degree that it does today. And really that's brought in a new economy. It's just a new marketplace where people can purchase goods or services. And so, the challenge that I've seen from others is that oftentimes that when people are on social media, they're in like a relaxed state. They're kind of scrolling through, and then they're obviously, because of the algorithms, looking at things that they love. And it happens to me too. And so it's really easy if you're on social media just to click that button and buy. What is your favorite tip from preventing yourself from impulse buying on social media?
So I don't know if you saw this last week, but I just put out something on so-called dream scrolling, which is the opposite of doom scrolling, which is exactly what you're talking about. People looking at nice homes, looking at nice trips, and they're putting these things in their shopping carts. And so I think the average amount of this stuff in our shopping carts, this survey found, was, thousands and thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a problem, especially with people who have shopping addictions. So I think the main point for people who are vulnerable to that is just to wait. Don't necessarily say no to yourself. Don't be in denial about it, but just say, I'm going to put this aside, keep the URL, keep it in the shopping cart. I'll come back to this tomorrow. If I still want to buy it tomorrow, I'll get it tomorrow. And I find personally, doing this myself all the time, that most of the time the next day, I don't feel that same impulse to buy that item. So if you just give yourself that buffer of a day or two, you're going to cut your expenses in half easily just by stopping and thinking about it instead of doing, the impulsive thing.
Did you talk to any folks who just refuse to enter their credit card information and establish it for autofill? Meaning if they're going to buy something, they have to re-enter it every single time.
That was another of the main points in that article. Yeah, you want to make it as difficult for yourself as possible to buy whatever it is you're looking at. So
Yeah.
the one-click thing, which the companies love, which Amazon loves,
Oh, yeah.
you want to prevent that. So if you have to enter your credit card information every single time, that creates enough friction, enough difficulty for yourself that it slows the process down and makes you think about it. So that also is an excellent tip. And then just think about whatever you're spending now, what would that look like in future if instead you saved that money, invested it, it doubles in 7 years, doubles again. All of a sudden, the $100 that you want to spend, it's more like $500. So do you really want to spend $500? And that makes your brain say, actually, no, I don't want to do that. So do the math and figure out how much this is actually going to cost you when you're old and gray, which is a lot.
So kind of shifting gears here, we like to focus on just kind of the bigger picture around personal finance in couples, right? And a lot of it simply has to do with what can generate either meaning in your marriage or happiness. And ultimately, we see that that's a role of money, right? It's just a tool to unlock, our dreams and make marriages more meaningful. So kind of like knowing that just as background, what does the world's longest happiness study say about money?
This is an excellent book for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's called The Good Life, and it is a study originated by Harvard that goes back decades and decades and talks to the same people over time about what is making them happy, what is not, where they're fulfilled, where they're not, and how money factors into all of that. So it's an amazing book. And what they found was basically, can money create happiness up to a certain level? Yes,
Hmm.
because it covers your basic needs. It helps you care for your family. It reduces the financial stress you have every day. So up to about $75,000 a year, yes, it can create happiness. Beyond that, once your needs are met, once you are fulfilled and taking care of your family and can take a vacation every once in a while, beyond that, the correlation between money and happiness is not so great. In fact, there's very little. So that is what people need to keep in mind, that they can't be on that hedonic treadmill of always needing more and more and more. Um, it's okay to want and need enough money to care for your family, but don't think that it's going to make you much happier than you are, because odds are it won't.
Can you share a little bit more about the hedonic treadmill? I love that you brought that up.
So that's it. Reminded me Elon's recent pay package, where he got $54 billion when
Yeah.
he's already the richest person in the world. It
Yeah.
reminded me of the hedonic treadmill, which is that whenever you get to a new level of earnings, of savings, whatever, once you get there, it's still not enough. And then
Right.
you create a new target. So maybe instead of 75,000, now you need 100. Once you get to 100, maybe you need 150. It's never enough, because there's a hole inside yourself, an emptiness that is not going to be filled.
Yeah.
So that's where people need to look into themselves and say, okay, maybe it's not things that are going to bring me happiness. Maybe it is relationships, which is what the main finding of that book was, The Good Life. They say that happiness comes from relationships. Um, and that is, I mean, that's their main conclusion of the entire book. If your relationships are quality, then that's going to lead to happiness in your life.
And interestingly, it wasn't just marriages, and we know the data behind that. We had Dr. Wilcox on, who is the director of the National Marriage Institute, and he, shares the fact that a people in satisfied marriages, on the whole, are happier than other people. But Dr. Walliger's book dives into that a little bit more deeply, and what I like is he also shares the importance of relationships with friends and having a strong social network. And when I saw that you had written about this, it was serendipitous to a book I had just finished, The Happier Hour, and then one I just finished before that, Money's In, with Dr. Thakur, that talks about the same kind of thing, and Dr. Manisha Thakur.
Manisha Thakor, yeah.
Yeah, she is highly successful in the financial world, and basically her book just talks about how at the end of the day that it's not that led to unhappiness, and that if you can't define your enough, then you're just going to, as you would say, be on that hedonic treadmill. And in the book that I just finished, The Happier Hour, they talked about Cassie Holmes at UCLA, the fact that that hedonic adaptation, meaning once you get to a new level of wealth, that you just adapt to it, and the things that were special aren't special anymore. And she traced it all the way up to lottery winners who won tens of millions of dollars, and it wasn't very long before they weren't any happier than others. And a matter of fact, she found that a lot of them were less happy. And then she points out that conversely, some people who are living in kind of third world nations, or maybe they have it tough because of hedonic adaptation, they don't feel like it's tough. And so for our listeners, who, at least I was this way, you're always like focusing on getting more, right? Because I think society tells us that we need to provide and protect. And like you said, there's a certain point where you must provide. Your basic needs must be met, and savings and retirement and healthcare and et cetera. But if you're providing in a way where it goes above and beyond that, and to do so sacrificing time with your family and friends, all the research says the same thing, you're going to be unhappy. So
yeah, you can be happy with very little, or you can be unhappy with a lot. And I think part of that has to do with your own personality, where your baseline tends to be. But if you think that money is the ultimate happiness solution, it is not.
what is one simple and actionable piece of personal finance advice that you want to share with our listeners?
I think time is probably the most powerful thing that people need to think about. People imagine that you have to be a wizard in the stock market to make a lot of money. That is not the case. The most powerful aspect that is going to generate your future financial security is time. Being 52 now, I've certainly seen that. And basically, as the saying goes, the best time to do something is 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. So you want to get into the market. The sooner the better, the younger the better. In fact, right now, I'm trying to get my kid, who is 19, to open his first retirement account. And then with the stock market at 7, 8, 9% annual gains on average, that will double every 7 years or so. And put it in a low cost, well-diversified index fund, and just watch it grow over time. And that is what is going to bring you financial security and peace of mind. So have as much possible time in the market as you can. There are going to be short-term dips, of course, but the long-term averages are in your favor. So just get started, even if it's tiny amounts. Try to grow that over time and let time work for you.
Well said, Chris, and thanks for the great conversation today.
My pleasure. It was so nice to spend time with you live and in person.
Likewise.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow Modern Husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.